The maid's son and the boss's daughter grew up together, but when love blossomed, the family did everything to tear them apart. The deafening crash of plates shattering against the marble floor of the Holloway mansion echoed through the corridors, followed by a high-pitched scream. Olivia Holloway, just 6 years old, cowered behind a silk curtain, her wide eyes fixed on the scene unfolding in the dining room. "You're incompetent," the shrill voice of Margaret Holloway, her mother, reverberated through the walls. "How dare you break my grandmother's china?" Kneeling on the floor, surrounded by shards of fine china, was Rosa Gomez, the housekeeper. Her hands were shaking as she tried in vain to put the broken pieces back together. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Rosa murmured, her voice breaking. "It was an accident. Accidents cost money," Margaret interrupted, her face contorted with anger. "And money is something you clearly don't have." Olivia watched, heart clenched, as her mother continued to berate Rosa. On the other side of the room, partially hidden behind a leather armchair, was Miguel, Rosa's 7-year-old son. Their gazes met, a mixture of fear and understanding passing between them. At that moment, something changed. An invisible connection formed between Olivia and Miguel, woven through the threads of empathy and shared innocence. 15 years have passed since that day. 15 years of lazy summers by the pool, of study afternoons in the mansion's library, of hushed laughter during formal dinners. 15 years of a friendship that grew in the shadows of social disparity, flourishing despite the invisible barriers that separated them. Olivia, now 21, was sitting on the edge of her king-size bed, her fingers drumming nervously on the silk comforter. Her long brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face with delicate features and piercing green eyes. Outside her window, the Chicago skyline sparkled against the night sky, a constant reminder of the privileged world she lived in. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. "Come in," she called, her voice betraying a hint of anxiety. The door opened, revealing Miguel. At 22, he had transformed into a tall, athletic young man with broad shoulders and striking features that recalled his Latin roots. His dark brown eyes, always warm when looking at Olivia, now carried a shadow of concern. "Hey," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "I got your message. What's up?" Olivia took a deep breath, feeling her heart racing. "Miguel, we need to talk," she began, gesturing for him to sit down next to her. Miguel hesitated for a moment before joining her on the bed. The closeness between them was both familiar and electrifying, a delicate dance they had perfected over the years. "Is it about college?" he asked, his voice low and reassuring. Olivia shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Not exactly. It's about us." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of unspoken emotions and repressed desires. "Liv," Miguel began, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "What's going on?" She turned to face him, her green eyes shining with a mixture of determination and fear. "I can't pretend anymore, Miguel. I can't go on acting as if what I feel for you is just friendship." The words hung between them, heavy and irreversible. Miguel stood motionless, his eyes fixed on hers, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Are you sure? You know what this means? What people will say?" "I know," she interrupted, taking his hands in hers. "Believe me, I've thought of all the reasons why this is a bad idea, but I can't fight it anymore. I love you, Miguel. Not as a friend, not as a brother. I'm in love with you." The world seemed to stop for a moment. The constant noise of the city outside disappeared, and all that remained was the sound of their accelerated breathing and the frantic beating of their hearts. Miguel closed his eyes, letting Olivia's words penetrate his soul. When he opened them again, there was a mixture of joy and torment in his gaze. "I love you too, Liv," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I always have. But you know we can't." "Why not?" Olivia challenged, squeezing his hands. "Because you're the housekeeper's son and I'm the boss's daughter? Because our families come from different worlds?" That doesn't matter to me, Miguel. You know me better than anyone else in this world. You see me for who I really am, not for my surname or my family's bank account. Miguel let out a heavy sigh, the conflict evident on his face. It's not that simple, Leave. Your family would never accept it. My mother could lose her job, and people, they'd be cruel. Then we'll fight it, Olivia insisted, determination shining in her eyes. Together. I'm not asking for us to make a public announcement tomorrow. I'm just asking for a chance for us. The silence stretched between them, fraught with possibility and danger. Miguel looked down at his intertwined hands, tracing gentle circles on her skin with his thumb. Finally, he looked up, meeting Olivia's hopeful eyes. Okay, he said softly. Let's give it a try. But we have to be careful, Liv. Very careful. Olivia's face lit up with a radiant smile. Without thinking, she leaned forward, pressing her lips against Miguel's in a soft, hesitant kiss. The world around them disappeared. At that moment, there were no social differences, no obstacles. They were just Olivia and Miguel, two hearts that had finally found their way to each other. When they parted, they were both panting, their foreheads still pressed together. This is going to be complicated, Miguel murmured, a reluctant smile forming on his lips. Olivia nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of love and determination. It will, but it's worth it. We're worth it. As the Chicago night pulsed outside, Olivia and Miguel remained embraced, savoring the first moments of their newfound love. The future was uncertain, full of challenges they could barely imagine. But at that moment, all that mattered was the here and now, and the silent promise they had made to each other, to face whatever came, together. The dawn in Chicago painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, the light of the rising sun reflecting in the windows of the skyscrapers. In Olivia's room, the first rays of morning seeped through the gaps in the curtains, gently illuminating Olivia and Miguel's sleeping faces. Miguel woke up first, momentarily disoriented. His eyes widened as he realized where he was and with whom. Olivia was sleeping peacefully beside him, her face serene and a slight smile on her lips. The reality of the night before hit him like a wave. Careful not to wake her, Miguel quietly got up. His heart was torn between the joy of newfound love and the weight of responsibility. He knew he had to leave before anyone saw him. As he moved around the room, collecting his shoes, his eyes fell on a photo on Olivia's bedside table. It was a picture of the two of them, taken last summer during a Holloway family picnic. In it, they were smiling, carefree and happy, with no idea of what the future held. A soft moan brought him out of his thoughts. Olivia was waking up. "Miguel?" she murmured, her green eyes slowly opening. He approached the bed, taking a seat on the edge. "Good morning, Liv," he said softly, brushing a lock of hair away from her face. Olivia smiled, still sleepy. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. Miguel couldn't help smiling back, but there was a shadow of concern in his eyes. It wasn't a dream, but we need to be careful, remember? Reality seemed to hit Olivia, and she sat up quickly. "What time is it? Has anyone seen you?" "It's okay," Miguel reassured her. "It's still early. I'm going out now before anyone wakes up." Olivia nodded, reluctantly. "When are we going to see each other again?" Miguel hesitated. "Maybe we should take a break, Liv. At least for a few days, so as not to arouse suspicion." The disappointment was evident on Olivia's face, but she understood. "You're right, but promise we'll find a way." "I promise," Miguel said, leaning down to place a soft kiss on her forehead. "Now I have to go." With one last look, Miguel quietly left the room, his heart heavy with separation, but full of hope for the future. Hours later, in the kitchen of the Holloway mansion, Rosa Gomez was preparing breakfast for the family. Her movements were precise and efficient, the result of years of practice. But today, there was a tension in her shoulders, a worry in her eyes that didn't go unnoticed. Miguel entered the kitchen, greeting his mother with a kiss on the cheek. "Good morning, Mama." Rosa looked at him attentively. "Miguel, where were you last night? I went to your room and you weren't there." Miguel felt his heart racing, but he kept his composure. I'm sorry, Mama, I went for a walk. I needed to think about a few things. Rosa frowned, not entirely convinced. Miguel, mijo, you know you can tell me anything, don't you? Before Miguel could answer, Margaret Holloway's voice echoed through the house. Rosa, where's my breakfast? Rosa sighed, picking up the prepared tray. We'll continue this conversation later, she said to Miguel before leaving the kitchen. Miguel watched his mother leave, a knot forming in his stomach. He hated lying to her, but how could he explain the truth? Upstairs, Olivia was getting ready for the day, her heart light despite her separation from Miguel. She went downstairs, entering the dining room where her parents were already sitting. Good morning, dear, her father, Robert Holloway, greeted over the newspaper. Margaret watched her daughter with critical eyes. Olivia, you look different today. Has something happened? Olivia felt her face heat up. No, Mom. I just slept well, that's all. Margaret didn't look convinced, but before she could press any further, Rosa came in with breakfast. Ah, Rosa, Margaret said, her tone changing to something colder. Tell Miguel to wash my car today. It's a disgrace. Olivia felt a surge of irritation. Mom, Miguel isn't the driver. He's studying, remember? Maybe we can hire someone to do that. Margaret looked at her daughter, surprised by her sudden defensiveness. Olivia, darling, Miguel has always helped with these tasks. I don't see why that would change now. Robert lowered the newspaper, looking from his wife to his daughter. Maybe Olivia's right, Margaret. The boy is in college now. We could consider... Nonsense, Margaret interrupted. The scholarship we got for him is more than enough. The least he can do is help out around here. Olivia bit her lip, fighting the urge to argue further. She knew she had to be careful, that she couldn't let her feelings for Miguel show. The rest of breakfast passed in tense silence. Olivia barely touched her food, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions. After breakfast, Olivia retired to the mansion's library, her usual refuge. She picked up a book at random from the shelf, but couldn't concentrate on the words. The library door opened softly, and Miguel entered. Their gazes met, an electric current passing between them. Liv, he said softly, closing the door behind him. I know we said we'd take a break, but I needed to see you. Olivia put the book aside and stood up. Me too, she admitted. They moved closer to each other, magnetized. Miguel took Olivia's hands in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. This is crazy, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Olivia nodded, a sad smile on her lips. I know, but I can't imagine not being with you. Miguel leaned over, touching his forehead to hers. We'll manage, he promised. I don't know how, but we will. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made them part abruptly. The library door opened, revealing Rosa. Miguel! Ah, there you are, she said, her eyes moving from her son to Olivia. Mrs. Holloway wants you to wash her car. Miguel nodded, casting one last glance at Olivia before following his mother out of the library. Olivia stayed behind, her heart beating frantically. She knew they were playing with fire, that every moment together was a risk. But the alternative, staying away from Miguel, seemed impossible now. Meanwhile, in Robert Holloway's office, a very different conversation was taking place. Robert, have you noticed anything strange with Olivia lately? Margaret asked, sitting elegantly in a leather armchair. Robert looked up from his papers. Strange how? She seems distracted. What about that defense of Rosa's son at breakfast? It's not like her to care about such things. Robert sighed, taking off his glasses. Margaret, Olivia is growing up. It's natural for her to start questioning certain things. Margaret narrowed her eyes. There's more to it than that. I have a feeling, Robert, and you know that my hunches are usually right. Robert watched his wife for a moment, recognizing the determined glint in her eyes. What do you suggest? I think we need to keep an eye on her, and maybe it's time we started thinking about her future. She can't stay here forever, you know. Robert nodded slowly, a feeling of unease settling in his chest. He loved his daughter and trusted her, but he also knew the world they lived in. A world where appearances mattered, where the right connections could make or break a person. Let's observe for now, he finally agreed. But let's not jump to conclusions. Margaret smiled, pleased. Of course, dear. I just want what's best for our Olivia. As the Chicago sun continued its journey across the sky, the inhabitants of the Holloway mansion went on with their lives, each carrying their own secrets and worries. For Olivia and Miguel, every moment was a mixture of ecstasy and fear, love and apprehension. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same. Fall arrived in Chicago, painting the trees in Lincoln Park in shades of red and gold. Olivia walked through the park, her brown leather boots crunching the fallen leaves beneath her feet. The fresh air brought with it a sense of change, of possibilities. She checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Miguel was late, something unusual for him. Over the last few weeks, they had met secretly whenever possible. Stolen moments in the park, whispered conversations in the corners of the mansion, meaningful glances across crowded rooms. Finally, she spotted him running down the path, his face flushed with exertion. "Sorry I'm late," he gasped, stopping in front of her. "My mother, she's asking more questions. It's getting difficult to leave without arousing suspicion." Olivia nodded understandingly, but couldn't help the pang of worry in her chest. "Miguel, maybe we should tell the truth, at least to your mother. She'd understand, wouldn't she?" Miguel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Olivia recognized as a sign of his anxiety. "I don't know, Liv. My mother, she's afraid of losing her job, afraid of what people would say, and rightly so." They began to walk side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, but never completely intertwining. Even here, away from the mansion, they couldn't let their guard down completely. "You know," Miguel began, his voice low, "there's something I've never told you about my father." Olivia looked at him, surprised. Miguel rarely talked about his father, who had died when he was very young. "What is it?" she asked softly. Miguel took a deep breath before continuing. "He didn't die in a car accident, as my mother always said. He left because he couldn't take the pressure." Olivia stopped walking, turning to face him. "What pressure?" "My father was a gardener at the home of a wealthy family in Los Angeles," Miguel explained, his eyes fixed on a distant point. "He fell in love with the family's youngest daughter. For a while, they had a secret romance. But when they were discovered..." He paused, swallowing. Olivia took his hand, squeezing it gently in support. "The family sent her to Europe. They threatened to sue my father for harassment if he tried to contact them. He lost everything, his job, the love of his life, his dignity. A few months later, Miguel didn't need to finish the sentence. Olivia felt her heart squeeze at the pain evident in his eyes. "Oh, Miguel," she whispered, pulling him into a tight embrace, not caring if anyone saw them. For a few moments, they stayed like that, finding comfort in each other. When they finally broke apart, Miguel's eyes were watery. "That's why my mother is so afraid," he said softly. "She saw what happened to my father. She doesn't want the same for me." Olivia felt the weight of this revelation. Suddenly, the magnitude of what they were doing, of the risks they were taking, seemed even greater. "We're not your parents, Miguel," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "We're stronger together, and my family. They're not like that family in Los Angeles. They'll understand, eventually." Miguel gave her a sad smile. "Do you really believe that?" Before Olivia could answer, the sound of her phone cut through the air. She pulled it out of her pocket, her face paling as she saw the name on the screen. "It's my mother," she said, casting an apologetic glance at Miguel before answering. "Hello?" Margaret's voice sounded tense on the other end of the line. "Olivia, where are you? I need you to come home immediately. We have visitors." Olivia frowned. "Visitors? Who?" "The Blackwoods," Margaret replied, a note of excitement in her voice. "Do you remember Alexander? He's back in Chicago and has come to visit us with his parents. I want you to be here to welcome them." Olivia's stomach sank. Alexander Blackwood, the son of one of her father's partners, heir to a considerable fortune. And if her mother had anything to say about it, her future suitor. "I'll be there in half an hour," Olivia replied mechanically, hanging up the phone. Miguel watched her, concern evident on his face. "Is everything all right?" Olivia shook her head, feeling suddenly exhausted. "Alexander Blackwood is at my house. My mother wants me to come back to see him." Understanding flashed across Miguel's face, followed by a shadow of jealousy. "Alexander Blackwood? The guy your mother is always mentioning as the perfect catch?" "Yeah." Olivia nodded, frustrated. "Yes, that's the one. Miguel, You need to go." He interrupted her, his voice neutral. "We can't arouse suspicion, remember?" Olivia wanted to protest, wanted to shout that she didn't care about Alexander or her mother's expectations. But she knew Miguel was right. They had to be careful. "I'll call you later," she promised, resisting the urge to kiss him right then and there. Miguel nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's going to be okay, Liv. We're stronger than that, remember?" Olivia echoed his words from before, hoping they were still true. Half an hour later, Olivia entered the living room of the Holloway mansion, where her parents were entertaining the Blackwoods. Alexander stood up as soon as he saw her, his smile bright and confident. "Olivia," he said, taking her hand and placing a soft kiss on her fingers. "It's a pleasure to see you again. You look even more stunning than I remember." Olivia forced a smile, ignoring her mother's look of approval. "It's good to see you too, Alexander. I hope the trip was enjoyable." As the conversation flowed around them, Olivia found herself thinking of Miguel, of how his rough working hands felt against hers, so different from Alexander's soft, manicured hands, how his smile, sad though it was, lit up her eyes in a way that Alexander's rehearsed smile never could. "Olivia," her mother's voice brought her back to the present. "Why don't you show Alexander the renovations we've done in the garden? I'm sure he'd love to see it." Recognizing her mother's cue, Olivia nodded. "Of course. Alexander, would you like to accompany me?" As they walked through the impeccably tended garden, Olivia couldn't help but think of all the times she had walked these same paths with Miguel, discussing books, dreams, and the future. "So, Olivia," Alexander began, his voice soft and cultivated, "I hear you're thinking of going to graduate school. Any particular field in mind?" Olivia hesitated. The truth was that she and Miguel had discussed the possibility of her doing a master's degree in comparative literature, something her mother would certainly not approve of. "I'm still considering my options," she replied diplomatically. Alexander smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. The touch, although polite, made Olivia want to pull away. "Well, if you need advice, I'm always available. My family has connections at several prestigious universities." Olivia was about to reply when she saw a familiar figure working in one of the flower beds. Miguel had his back to them, but she would recognize that posture anywhere. "Miguel," she called out before she could stop herself. Miguel turned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Olivia with Alexander. He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Miss Holloway," he said formally, his eyes avoiding hers. "Mr. Blackwood," Alexander looked from Olivia to Miguel, one eyebrow slightly arched. "Do you two know each other well?" Olivia felt her heart race. "Miguel grew up here," she explained, trying to keep her voice casual. "His mother has been our housekeeper for years." Alexander nodded, his interest clearly waning. "Oh, I see. Well, Miguel, the garden is beautifully tended. Congratulations on your work." Miguel murmured a thank you, his eyes meeting Olivia's for a brief moment before returning to his work. As Alexander guided her back to the house, talking about some charity event his family was organizing, Olivia felt as if she was being pulled in two different directions. On the one hand, the world she had always known, with its expectations and privileges. On the other, an uncertain future, but one full of love and possibilities with Miguel. Back in the living room, Margaret watched her daughter return with Alexander, noticing the slight blush on his cheeks. She smiled, satisfied, Everything was going according to plan. What Margaret didn't know, what no one in the room could have guessed, was that Olivia's heart was in the garden, with the young man who was planting flowers and dreams under the Chicago fall sun. The soft sound of jazz floated through the air of the Holloway's elegant dining room. Crystals tinkled, silverware glided over fine china, and polite laughter punctuated the conversation. It was another of Margaret Holloway's famous dinner parties, where Chicago's high society gathered to discuss business, gossip, and, of course, arrange convenient marriages. Olivia, sitting between Alexander Blackwood and a young heir to a technology company, felt suffocated. Her emerald green silk dress, carefully chosen by her mother, seemed to tighten more and more with each passing minute. "So, Olivia," the honeyed voice of Cecilia Van Houten, one of her mother's closest friends, caught her attention. "I hear you and Alexander have been spending a lot of time together lately. Any special announcements coming up?" Olivia felt her face heat up. Over the past few weeks, her mother had orchestrated a series of casual encounters between her and Alexander. Lunches, walks in the park, even a trip to the theater. All part of Margaret's carefully crafted plan to unite the Holloway and Blackwood families. Mrs. Van Houten," Alexander interjected with a charming smile. "Olivia and I are just good friends, although I must say that every moment in her company is a real pleasure." The women at the table let out appreciative giggles, while Olivia fought the urge to roll her eyes. She glanced across the room, where Miguel was serving wine to the guests. Their gazes met for a brief moment, a silent electric current passing between them. "Miguel," Margaret's sharp voice cut through the air, "make sure that Mr. Blackwood's and Mr. Peterson's glasses are always full. We can't leave our guests thirsty, can we?" Miguel nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am." Olivia felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. The way her mother spoke to Miguel, as if he were invisible, bothered her deeply. She opened her mouth to say something, but felt Alexander's hand on her arm. "Is everything all right, darling?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. Olivia forced a smile. "Yes, just a bit of a headache. I think I'm going to get some fresh air. Excuse me." She stood up abruptly, ignoring the curious glances of the guests, and went out onto the terrace. The cool Chicago night air enveloped her, bringing momentary relief. Seconds later, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, expecting to see Alexander, she was surprised to find Miguel. "Liv," he said softly, "are you all right?" Olivia felt tears forming in her eyes. "No, Miguel, I'm not all right. I can't take it anymore. The lies, the expectations, the way they treat you." Miguel took a step forward, his hand outstretched as if to touch her, but he hesitated. "I know, but we have to be careful, remember?" "Why?" Olivia exploded, her voice an anguished whisper. "Why do we need to hide? I'm tired of pretending, Miguel. I'm tired of acting like I don't love you with every fiber of my being." Miguel's eyes widened at the intensity of her words. "Liv, Before he could finish, the terrace door opened. Alexander emerged, his face a mask of polite concern. "Olivia, your mother's worried." Olivia quickly turned away from Miguel, discreetly wiping away a stray tear. "I'm fine, Alexander. I just needed a moment." Alexander looked from Olivia to Miguel, a shadow of suspicion passing through his eyes. "I see. Well, when you're ready, your presence is being requested. It seems your father has an important announcement to make." Olivia nodded, casting one last glance at Miguel before following Alexander back inside. Heart heavy, she wondered what announcement her father might have that couldn't wait until the end of dinner. Back in the dining room, all conversation ceased when Robert Holloway stood up, glass of champagne in hand. His face glowed with what looked like pride and excitement. "My dear friends," he began, his resonant voice filling the room, "I am pleased to announce a partnership that will change Chicago's business landscape." Olivia felt her stomach sink. Something in her expression, in the way Margaret smiled triumphantly, told her that this announcement was about more than just business. "Holloway Enterprises and Blackwood Industries," Robert continued, "will not only be joining forces in a multi-million-dollar venture, but they will also, be uniting our families. The silence in the room was palpable. Olivia felt all eyes turned to her and Alexander. "It is with great joy," Robert smiled, looking directly at his daughter, "that I announce the engagement of my dear Olivia to the brilliant Alexander Blackwood." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. Margaret rushed to embrace Olivia, tears of happiness in her eyes. Alexander, looking genuinely surprised but not displeased, took Olivia's hand and kissed it gently. Olivia was in shock. Her world seemed to be spinning, the voices around her becoming a distant hum. Through the haze of her confusion, she saw Miguel standing by the kitchen door, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. "Mom," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. I need a minute." Ignoring Margaret's protests and the confused looks from the guests, Olivia got up and ran out of the room. She didn't stop until she reached the garden, the place where she had so often found refuge with Miguel. Falling to her knees on the damp grass, Olivia finally let the tears fall. Her future, her dreams, everything seemed to be falling apart around her. "Liv?" Miguel's soft voice reached her through her anguish. She looked up to see him standing a few paces away, hesitant and wounded. "Miguel," she sobbed. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about this." He knelt down beside her, finally giving in to the desire to touch her. His rough hands wrapped around hers, bringing a familiar comfort. "I believe you," he said softly. "But Liv, what are we going to do now?" The question hung between them, heavy and frightening. The distant sound of laughter and music from the party seemed a cruel reminder of the world Olivia was part of, a world that now threatened to separate them forever. "I don't know," Olivia admitted, her voice breaking. "But I know I can't lose you, Miguel. I can't live a lie." Miguel pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. "I'm here, Liv. No matter what happens, I'm here." For a few moments, they stayed like that, clinging to each other as if the world was about to end. And in a way, for them, it was. The sound of approaching footsteps made them separate abruptly. Rosa, Miguel's mother, emerged from the shadows, her face a mixture of concern and resignation. "Miguel," she called softly, "you need to go back. They're looking for you." Her eyes turned to Olivia, a painful realization flashing through them. "And you, miss, your mother is calling you. The groom is waiting." Olivia felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The reality of her situation hit her full force. She was Olivia Holloway, the daughter of one of Chicago's most prominent families, now engaged to Alexander Blackwood. And Miguel. Miguel was the housekeeper's son, the boy who grew up at the back of the mansion. But when she looked into Miguel's eyes, she saw the same love, the same determination that she felt. At that moment, Olivia made a decision. "No," she said, her voice firm despite her tears. "I'm not going back. I can't." Rosa looked at her in surprise. "Miss, you don't know what you're talking about. Think of the scandal, the consequences." "Mama," Miguel interrupted gently, "please, understand." Rosa looked from her son to Olivia, years of fear and worry evident in her eyes. But there was something else there too, understanding, perhaps even a hint of hope. "Do you two," she whispered, "have any idea what you're doing?" Olivia stood up, holding Miguel's hand tightly. "Yes, Rosa. We know it won't be easy, but we can't live a lie. We can't deny what we feel." Miguel nodded, squeezing Olivia's hand. "Mama, remember what you always used to tell me about Papa? That he died of a broken heart because he couldn't be with the one he loved. I don't want that fate for me. For us." Rosa closed her eyes, a solitary tear running down her cheek. When she opened them again, there was a determination in them that Olivia had never seen before. "So," Rosa said, her voice trembling slightly, "what do you intend to do?" Olivia and Miguel looked at each other, years of love and trust passing between them in a single glance. "Let's go," Olivia finally said. "Tonight, now." Miguel nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Wherever you want to go, Liv, I'm with you. Rosa watched them for a long moment, the weight of her own lost love story hanging over her. Finally, she nodded. "Go," she said softly. "I'll give you some time before I tell anyone. But be quick and careful." Olivia felt a wave of gratitude for this woman, who had always been more of a mother to her than Margaret had ever been. She hugged Rosa tightly, whispering an emotional "thank you." As Miguel hugged his mother, Olivia looked up at the brightly lit mansion. Inside, her family, her friends, and her supposed future awaited her. But here, under the Chicago stars, with Miguel by her side, she was choosing a different future. An uncertain future, perhaps, but a real one. "Ready?" Miguel asked, holding out his hand to her. Olivia took one last look at the house she had grown up in, at the life she was leaving behind. Then, with a determined smile, she took Miguel's hand. "Ready." And so, under the starry Chicago sky, Olivia Holloway and Miguel Gomez took the first step towards their future together, leaving behind a world of expectations and embracing one of possibilities. The rising sun painted the Milwaukee sky in shades of pink and orange, a spectacle that Olivia Holloway would never have truly appreciated in her previous life. Sitting on the small balcony of the one-bedroom apartment she now called home, she held a cup of cheap coffee, watching the city wake up. 3 months had passed since the night she and Miguel fled Chicago. 3 months of discoveries, challenges, and a love that only seemed to grow every day. "Good morning, Hermosa." Miguel's sleepy voice brought her out of her thoughts. He joined her at the counter, placing a soft kiss on her forehead before sitting down in the chair next to her. Olivia smiled, handing him his own cup of coffee. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" Miguel nodded, taking a sip of his coffee before grimacing. "I'm still not used to this instant coffee." Olivia laughed softly. "Me neither. But hey, at least we have coffee, right?" This was their new reality. Small luxuries sacrificed, comforts left behind, but the freedom and love they shared made up for it. "I have an interview today," Miguel said, a touch of hope in his voice. "At the municipal library. It's not much, but it would be a stable job." Olivia shook his hand, proud. "That's great, Miguel. I'm sure you'll do well." Since arriving in Milwaukee, they had both faced the harsh reality of building a life from scratch. Miguel had gotten a few temporary jobs, delivery boy, waiter, even a construction worker. Olivia, on the other hand, was working as a barista in a local coffee shop, a job that made her appreciate the bad coffee they had at home even more. "What about you?" Miguel asked, his eyes soft with concern. "Any news from college?" Olivia sighed, shaking her head. "Not yet, but hey, at least they let me take the entrance test. It's a start, right?" Miguel nodded, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "Yes, it is. And no matter what happens, we're in this together." The sound of a notification on Olivia's cell phone broke the moment. She picked up the device, her face paling as she saw the name on the screen. "It's my mom," she whispered, her hand shaking slightly. Miguel straightened up, concern evident on his face. "What does she say?" Olivia opened the message, reading aloud. "Olivia, I hope this message finds you well. Your father and I are worried. Please come home. We can talk about all this. The Blackwood family is willing to forget the incident if you return immediately. Think about your future, dear. Love. Mama." A heavy silence fell over the small counter. Olivia reread the message, a whirlwind of emotions passing across her face. "Liv?" Miguel asked softly, his voice laden with concern. Olivia looked up, meeting Miguel's anxious gaze. She saw in them the same fear she felt, the fear that she might consider the offer, that she might choose the comfortable life she had left behind. With one decisive movement, Olivia deleted the message. "My future is here," she said firmly, taking Miguel's hand. "With you." The relief on Miguel's face was palpable. He pulled her into a tight hug, their shapes fitting perfectly. "I love you, Liv," he murmured against her hair. "More than I can express. I love you too," she replied, her voice muffled against his chest. When they separated, Olivia noticed the time on the kitchen clock. "Oh, damn! I'm going to be late for work." Their morning routine had turned into a frenzy of activity. Olivia rushed to get dressed while Miguel prepared a quick sandwich for her to take away. "Don't forget your coat," Miguel shouted as Olivia ran for the door. "It'll get cold later." Olivia stopped, picking up the worn-out coat they had found in a second-hand store. It was quite a change from the designer coats she usually wore, but somehow, this one meant so much more. "Good luck at the interview," she said, giving Miguel a quick kiss before leaving. The way to the cafeteria was a mixture of a crowded bus and a short walk. Olivia watched the people around her, hurried workers, sleepy students, elderly people strolling calmly. This was a life so different from the one she knew in Chicago, and yet she had never felt so alive. Arriving at the coffee shop, Olivia was greeted by the familiar smell of roasted beans and the comforting sound of the espresso machine. "Hey, Liv!" Sarah, her co-worker, greeted her with a warm smile. "Ready for another day of caffeinated madness?" Olivia laughed, tying her apron. "Always." The hours passed in a blur of coffee orders, friendly chats with regular customers, and the occasional milk spill. It was hard work, but Olivia found that she enjoyed the sense of accomplishment that came with each satisfied smile from a customer. During her lunch break, Olivia checked her phone, smiling when she saw a message from Miguel. "The interview went great. They said they'll be in touch soon. I can't wait to tell you everything. Love you." She replied quickly, her heart light with the news. Back at work, Olivia was wiping down the counter when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "A large latte, please, with almond milk." She turned, freezing at the sight of Alexander Blackwood standing on the other side of the counter, impeccable in his expensive suit. Alexander?" she stammered, her face losing color. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Olivia. What a coincidence to find you here." Olivia knew it was no coincidence. Somehow, they had found her. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Alexander leaned over the counter, his voice just a whisper. "Your mother is devastated, Olivia. Your father, well, let's just say business has suffered since his disappearance." Olivia felt a twinge of guilt, quickly replaced by determination. "I'm sorry they're suffering, Alexander, but this was my choice." "A foolish choice," he retorted, his tone losing its false cordiality. "What do you hope to achieve here? Serving coffee? Living in a tiny apartment with the housekeeper's son?" His words hit her like a slap, but Olivia stood her ground. "It's an honest life. A life I've chosen." Alexander shook his head, disappointment evident in his eyes. "You could have it all, Olivia. Wealth, status, a bright future. Instead, you chose this." Olivia looked around the cozy cafe at the smiling customers, at her hands calloused by honest work. Then she turned her gaze to Alexander, a new confidence in her voice. "Yes, I chose this. And you know what, Alexander? I've never been happier." The surprise on his face was evident. Clearly, this was not the reaction he had expected. "Your latte will be ready in a minute," Olivia said, turning to prepare the drink. When she handed Alexander his glass, he hesitated before taking it. "This isn't over, Olivia. Your family. They're not going to give up that easily." Olivia nodded, a calm determination in her eyes. "I know, but I'm not giving up what I have here either." Alexander watched her for a long moment before turning and leaving the cafe without saying another word. As soon as he left, Olivia felt her legs go weak. Sarah rushed to her side, concern evident on her face. "Liv, are you okay? Who was that guy?" Olivia took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Someone from my past, someone I hoped I'd never see again." The rest of the shift passed in a blur. As soon as her shift was over, Olivia rushed home, her mind a storm of worries and fears. When she entered the apartment, she found Miguel sitting on the sofa, a book open on his lap. On seeing her, he immediately realized that something was wrong. "Liv, What happened? The words came out in a torrent as Olivia told him about Alexander's visit. Miguel listened to her in silence, his expression becoming increasingly grim. They found us, he finally said, his voice low. What do we do now? Olivia sat down next to him, taking his hands in hers. I don't know, Miguel, but I know I don't want to go back. I can't go back to that life. Miguel pulled her close, wrapping her in a protective embrace. I won't let them take you away, Liv. I promise. They stayed like that for a long time, finding comfort in each other as the sun set outside, painting the Milwaukee sky in shades of purple and orange. Finally, Olivia pulled away, looking into Miguel's eyes with renewed determination. Maybe it's time we face this head on. Miguel frowned, confused. What do you mean? I mean, Olivia took a deep breath. That maybe we should go back to Chicago. Not to stay, but to talk to my parents. To make it clear that this is the life we've chosen. Miguel watched her for a long moment, considering her words. Are you sure about that, Liv? It would be risky. Olivia nodded slowly. I am. We can't keep running away forever. It's time we faced our past so we can truly embrace our future. A slow smile spread across Miguel's face. You're amazing, you know that. The bravest girl I've ever met. Olivia smiled back, feeling a wave of love for this man who was willing to face everything by her side. We're brave together. As night fell over Milwaukee, Olivia and Miguel began to plan their trip back to Chicago. It wouldn't be easy, they knew. There would be tears, screams, maybe even threats, but they would face it all together. Because in the end, their love, a love that grew in the shadows of an opulent mansion and blossomed in the hardships of a simple life, was stronger than any obstacle the world could put in their way. And so, with hearts full of determination and hands entwined, Olivia and Miguel prepared for the next chapter of their journey, a chapter that would take them back to the beginning, but with the promise of a new beginning. The train glided smoothly along the tracks, cutting through the landscape of the American Midwest. Olivia Holloway looked out of the window, watching the green fields give way to the familiar suburbs of Chicago. Next to her, Miguel Gomez held her hand tightly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin, a silent gesture of support and love. Are you ready for this? Miguel asked softly, his dark eyes full of concern and determination. Olivia took a deep breath, turning to face him. Honestly, I don't know if I'll ever be completely ready, but I know I need to do this. We need to do this. The announcement of their arrival at Union Station echoed through the carriage. Olivia felt her heart race. Chicago. Home. Or at least what used to be home. As they exited the station, the city welcomed them with its familiar, frenetic energy. Cabs honking, people hurrying along the sidewalks. The aroma of street food mixed with the characteristic smell of a large metropolis. For a moment, Olivia felt disoriented, as if the last few months in Milwaukee had only been a dream. Hey, Miguel's voice brought her back to the present. We're in this together, remember? Olivia nodded, squeezing his hand. Together. They took a cab, and Olivia gave the address she never thought she'd say again. The Holloway Mansion in the elegant Gold Coast neighborhood. Along the way, the city passed them by like a blur of memories. The park where they used to walk. The cafe where they had their first unofficial conversation. The bookstore where Miguel bought Olivia her first book of poetry. When the cab stopped in front of the imposing gates of the Holloway Mansion, Olivia felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. There, in front of her, was the symbol of everything she had left behind: privilege, expectations, a life planned down to the last detail. We can do this, Miguel whispered, his voice steady despite the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. Olivia nodded, unable to form words. Together, they walked to the intercom. With a trembling finger, Olivia pressed the button. Holloway Residence. The familiar voice of Rosa, Miguel's mother, sounded through the speaker. Mama, Miguel replied, his voice laced with emotion. It's us. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of the gate opening. Olivia and Miguel exchanged a glance before taking the first step into the property. The path to the front door had never seemed so long. Each step was like walking through memories, childhood games, whispered conversations, stolen glances. When they finally reached the door, it opened before they could knock. Rosa stood there, tears in her eyes, her trembling hands covering her mouth in shock. "Mijo," she whispered, pulling Miguel into a tight hug. Then, to Olivia's surprise, Rosa hugged her too. "Oh, girl, you're back." "Just to talk, Mama," Miguel explained softly. "We need to sort things out." Rosa nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Your parents are in the living room, Olivia. They don't know you're here." Olivia took a deep breath, bracing herself. "Thank you, Rosa, for everything." Side by side, Olivia and Miguel entered the mansion. The interior was exactly as Olivia remembered it, elegant, spotless, cold. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor as they made their way to the living room. At the entrance to the living room, Olivia stopped, frozen. There they were, Robert and Margaret Holloway, her parents, sitting stiffly on their Italian leather sofas, as if posing for a perfect family portrait. "Mom, Dad," Olivia called out, her voice firmer than she felt. The sound of breaking glasses filled the air as Margaret Holloway downed her glass of wine, shock evident on her aristocratic face. Robert Holloway stood up abruptly, his face a mixture of relief and fury. "Olivia," Margaret gasped, standing up on shaky legs. "Oh my God, you're back." Before Olivia could reply, her mother wrapped her in a tight hug. For a moment, Olivia allowed herself to be that little girl again, wrapped in her mother's arms. But then reality hit her again. "I didn't come back to stay," Olivia said softly, pulling away from the hug. "We came to talk." It was then that her parents seemed to notice Miguel, standing silently next to Olivia. Margaret's face contorted in a mixture of disgust and incredulity. "You!" she hissed, pointing an accusing finger at Miguel. "How dare you bring him here?" "Margaret," Robert warned, his voice tense. He turned to Olivia, his eyes pleading. "Daughter, please, let's talk. Just us." Olivia shook her head, taking Miguel's hand. "No, Dad. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of Miguel. He's part of my life now. The most important part." A tense silence fell over the room. Margaret slumped heavily on the sofa, as if her legs could no longer support her. Robert ran his hand over his face, seeming to age 10 years in seconds. "Why?" Margaret finally asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you do this to us, Olivia? We had everything planned for you, a bright future, an advantageous marriage." "That's the problem, Mom," Olivia replied, her voice soft but firm. "You planned everything. But what about my plans? What about my dreams?" Robert stepped forward, his eyebrows furrowed. "Olivia, we only wanted the best for you. Everything we did was with your well-being in mind." "I know, Dad," Olivia said, feeling the tears start to form. "But what's best for me isn't necessarily what you think it is. I love Miguel. He makes me happy in a way that no advantageous marriage ever could." Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "Love? And what does love put on the table, Olivia? How do you expect to live? Serving coffee for the rest of your life?" Miguel, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "With all due respect, Mrs. Holloway, there's nothing wrong with working honestly. Olivia and I are building a life together. It's not easy, but it's ours." Robert looked at Miguel, a mixture of reluctant respect and frustration in his eyes. "And you think you can give my daughter the life she deserves, the life she's used to?" "Dad," Olivia interrupted, "the life I deserve is the one I choose for myself, and I chose Miguel. I chose a life that may not have luxuries, but has love, respect, and freedom." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret stared at a spot on the wall, silent tears streaming down her face. Robert seemed to be fighting an internal battle, his emotions oscillating between anger and understanding. "Do you really love him?" Robert finally asked, his voice low. Olivia looked at Miguel, a soft smile on her lips. More than I thought it was possible to love someone. Robert nodded slowly, as if processing a difficult piece of information. And you? He turned to Miguel. Do you love her enough to give her up if it's for her own good? Miguel looked Robert in the eye, his voice firm. I love her enough to fight for her every day of my life. But if Olivia ever decides she doesn't want me anymore, I'll let her go. Because what I want, above all, is her happiness. Miguel's words seemed to have a profound effect on Robert. He sat down heavily, looking defeated. Olivia, he said after a long moment, are you really happy? Olivia felt the tears finally fall. Yes, Dad. I'm happier than I've ever been. Margaret finally turned to face them, her eyes red and swollen. And what happens now? Do you just disappear from our lives? Olivia shook her head, taking a hesitant step towards her parents. No, Mom. I want you to be part of my life. Our life. But on my terms? As adults, as equals. Robert and Margaret exchanged a look, years of expectations and traditions weighing on them. Finally, Robert stood up, walking over to Olivia and Miguel. It's not going to be easy, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. We have a lot to learn, a lot to accept. But you're our daughter, Olivia. And if this is the path you've chosen, he held out his hand to Miguel, then we'll do our best to understand. Miguel, surprised, shook Robert's hand. Thank you, sir. I promise I'll do everything I can to make Olivia happy. Margaret joined them, her eyes still full of doubt, but with a glint of reluctant acceptance. It will take time, she said softly, but you're our daughter, and we want you in our lives. Olivia felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She hugged her parents, tears of relief and hope streaming down her face. As they walked away, Olivia looked at Miguel, seeing in him a reflection of her own emotion. They had faced the past, and, although the future was still uncertain, they now had hope. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She looked at the scene before her family and the family she had worked for so many years, united in a way she had never imagined possible. I think we could all use some tea, she said softly. And so, in that room where so many important decisions had been made, where expectations and traditions had reigned for generations, a new tradition was being born. A tradition of acceptance, of unconditional love, of family that transcends social class and expectations. As Rosa poured the tea, Olivia and Miguel exchanged a look full of love and promise. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be more obstacles to overcome and prejudices to face. But now, with the reluctant but growing support of their families, they felt ready to face anything. The sun was beginning to set over Chicago, casting a golden glow through the windows of the Holloway mansion. And in that moment, wrapped in the warmth of her reunited family, Olivia knew she had made the right choice. That love, true and pure, really could overcome all barriers. The summer sun bathed the garden of the Holloway mansion in golden light, illuminating the tables decorated with wildflowers and the colorful ribbons that danced in the gentle breeze. It was a perfect day for a wedding, Olivia thought, as she nervously adjusted the simple but elegant white dress she had chosen for the occasion. 2 years had passed since that tense afternoon in the Holloways' living room. 2 years of ups and downs, of heated arguments and exciting reconciliations, of small victories and big changes. And now, here they were, about to celebrate their love in front of everyone who mattered in their lives. It's almost time. Rosa's soft voice brought her out of her thoughts. The woman who had been so much more than a housekeeper to Olivia smiled, tears shining in her eyes. You look beautiful, my dear. Olivia hugged Rosa tightly, feeling a wave of gratitude for this woman who had been a pillar of strength and love throughout her life. Thank you, Rosa, for everything. A soft knock on the door announced the arrival of Margaret Holloway. Olivia turned, her heart racing as she saw her mother standing in the doorway, a small, hesitant smile on her lips. Oh, Olivia, Margaret whispered, her eyes roaming over her daughter's dress. You look stunning. The last 2 years hadn't been easy for Margaret. Accepting that her daughter had chosen a path so different from the one she had planned was a slow and sometimes painful process. But there, seeing Olivia radiant in her wedding dress, Margaret finally understood. Her daughter's happiness was all that really mattered. "Thank you, Mom," Olivia replied, feeling the tears begin to form. Margaret moved closer, taking her daughter's hands in hers. "I've brought you something," she said, opening a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate pearl necklace. "It was your grandmother's. She always said it should be worn by a bride truly in love." Olivia felt her heart clench with emotion. This small gesture symbolized so much: acceptance, love, the bridge being rebuilt between her and her mother. "It's perfect," she whispered, allowing Margaret to place the necklace around her neck. Outside, the guests were beginning to gather. It was an eclectic mix: Chicago high society sitting side by side with the new friends Olivia and Miguel had made in Milwaukee. Alexander Blackwood was there, accompanied by a young artist he had met on one of his trips. Even Sarah, Olivia's former co-worker from the coffee shop, was there, smiling broadly next to her boyfriend. At the makeshift altar, Miguel waited nervously, adjusting the tie of his rented suit. Next to him, his best friend from literature school smiled encouragingly. Robert Holloway appeared in the doorway, his face a mixture of pride and restrained emotion. "It's time, darling," he said softly. Olivia took a deep breath, picking up the bouquet of wildflowers that Rosa had handed her. With one last look in the mirror, she smiled. This was the beginning of a new chapter, and she was more than ready to write it. Soft music began to play as Olivia walked down the makeshift aisle in the garden, arm in arm with her father. The guests stood up, smiles and tears of joy everywhere. But Olivia only had eyes for Miguel. He was there, at the end of the aisle, his eyes shining with love and admiration. When their gazes met, the world around them seemed to disappear. At that moment, it was just the two of them. Robert kissed Olivia's cheek before handing Miguel his hand. "Take good care of her," he said, his voice laced with emotion. "With my life," Miguel promised solemnly. The ceremony was simple and emotional. Olivia and Miguel exchanged vows they had written, words that spoke of love, respect, and the journey they had traveled together. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. The reception that followed was a celebration of love and togetherness. Robert Holloway, to the surprise of many, gave an emotional toast. "When Olivia was little," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I used to say that I wanted the best for her. But I made the mistake of thinking I knew what was best. Today, seeing my daughter so radiant, so truly happy, I realize that the best thing for her has always been to follow her heart." He raised his glass towards the couple. "To Olivia and Miguel, may your love continue to teach and inspire us." Margaret, with tears in her eyes, added her own toast. "Family isn't just about blood or names. It's about love, acceptance, and growing together. Welcome to the family, Miguel." As the evening progressed, Olivia and Miguel circulated among the guests, thanking everyone for coming. When they reached Alexander, there was a moment of tension. "Congratulations," Alexander said, surprising everyone with his sincerity. "You've proved me wrong. Love, well, maybe it really does overcome everything." Olivia smiled, squeezing Miguel's hand. "Thank you, Alexander. I hope you find happiness too." The young artist next to Alexander smiled, linking her arm with his. The look they exchanged did not go unnoticed by Olivia. Perhaps Alexander was also finding his own path to happiness. When the moon was high in the sky and the stars were shining brightly, Olivia and Miguel moved a little away from the party, finding a quiet moment under an old tree in the garden. "So, Mrs. Gomez Holloway," Miguel smiled, pulling Olivia close. "Happy?" Olivia laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "More than I ever thought possible, Mr. Gomez Holloway." They stood there for a moment, just enjoying each other's presence, the distant sound of the music and the laughter of the guests creating a perfect soundtrack for the moment. "You know," Olivia said softly, "when we fled Chicago that night, I was terrified. I didn't know what the future held for us." Miguel nodded, remembering that tense night. I was scared too. But I knew that as long as we were together, we would find a way. And we did, Olivia smiled. It wasn't easy, but every challenge, every obstacle, it was all worth it to get here. Miguel kissed her softly, their foreheads touching as they parted. And this is just the beginning, my love. We have a lifetime ahead of us. Olivia felt her heart fill with love and hope. A lifetime doesn't seem long enough to love you, she whispered. Back at the party, Rosa watched the couple from a distance, her heart overflowing with joy. She thought of her late husband, how proud he would have been to see his son find such true love. Robert and Margaret joined her, following her gaze to where Olivia and Miguel were. They really love each other, don't they? Margaret said softly, a note of admiration in her voice. Rosa nodded, a serene smile on her lips. Yes, they love each other. And that love, it's changed us all, don't you think? Robert put a hand on Rosa's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. You're right, Rosa. They taught us the true meaning of family, of unconditional love. The three of them stood there, watching the young couple return to the dance floor, their faces lit up with happiness. Soft music lulled the guests, and under the Chicago stars, two families, once separated by class and prejudice, now danced together, united by Olivia and Miguel's love. As the evening progressed, the guests began to say goodbye. Olivia and Miguel, exhausted but exhilarated, were preparing to leave on their honeymoon, a simple road trip along the Lake Michigan coast. Before they left, Olivia hugged her parents and Rosa one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice laced with emotion, "for everything, for understanding, for accepting, for loving." Margaret kissed her daughter's forehead. "Go and be happy, my dear. That's all we ever wanted for you." Miguel hugged his mother tightly. "I love you, Mama," he whispered. "Thank you for always believing in us." As the car drove away, taking the newlywed couple on their new adventure, the remaining guests waved and threw flower petals. Robert, Margaret, and Rosa stood side by side, watching the car disappear into the night. "You know," Robert said thoughtfully, "I think we've learned as much from them as they've learned from us." Margaret nodded, wiping away a tear. "They taught us that true love knows no barriers, that family is more than blood or name." Rosa smiled, her heart full of gratitude. "They showed us that sometimes, to find true happiness, you need the courage to defy expectations and follow your heart." The party lights went out one by one, but the glow of Olivia and Miguel's love continued to illuminate the night. It was the end of a chapter, yes, but also the beginning of many others. A love story that began in the shadows of an opulent mansion and blossomed under the sun of a simple but meaningful life. And so, as the moon shone over Chicago, Olivia and Miguel's story, a story of courage, of challenges overcome, and of unconditional love, continued to be written. A reminder to all that, in the end, true love always finds a way.
Did this narrative stir your emotions? Don't forget to express your approval with a like. Take advantage of the Super Thanks feature, available just below the video, to offer direct support to the channel and contribute to the production of more fascinating content. Subscribe and remember to activate the bell to stay up to date with all the latest updates. And attention, a new exciting story is already ready to be displayed on your screen. Your participation means a lot to me, and I hope to count on your presence soon. Thank you very much for dedicating your time to this video.